Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about a title I backed on Kickstarter a while back, specifically the Game Kitchen's Blasphemous, a gore-soaked Metroidvania with a splash of Dark Souls. Will the gameplay have you exclaiming Deus Vult? Or is it more heretical than friendship and magic? You are the penitent one, sole survivor of the Brotherhood of Silent Sorrows, now tasked with waging a one-man war against a twisted religion gone extra mad. I have to specify extra, given that the whole belief system native to the lands of Cvstodia were pretty brutal to begin with, but got sufficiently worse by the time the game rolls around. That said, unless you're amongst the folks that have already gotten the chance to look at the Kickstarter post for Blasphemous that fleshes out the narrative behind what the heck kicked off the game, you might end up feeling a little bit lost at the outset. Don't worry, I've left a handy-dandy link in the description for folks who are curious/lore hungry. Still, even without the context provided by that info dump, or the bit of background that the Blasphemous comic provides, such as how you ended up surrounded by naked corpses at the bottom of a cliff, well, the gothic wasteland of ruined cathedrals and malformed fanatics do a remarkably good job of ingraining into you just how perishly twisted the world of the Grievous Miracle currently is. There's a lot of environmental storytelling at play in the game, but that's not to say there isn't plenty of lore to be found, with juicy details and descriptions of a number of items, many of which overlap with other items, provide full narratives about certain characters or even bosses you end up encountering. And hey, the NPCs you get to chat with also provide a different lens to look at the world, especially given the little story arcs you can pursue for them. That there were different outcomes for them, as well as a pair of endings to pursue, gave a lot of story nuggets to explore ultimately. As for the gameplay itself, there's a fair amount to unpack, so bear with me as I dive in. To begin with, unholy? Heck is Blasphemous challenging. Sure, the tutorial area may convince you to let down your guard, since it provides a surprisingly friendly introduction for a Souls-like. There's no surprise murder waiting for you at the end, but don't let the gracious manner in which it introduces you to the basics fool you. Once it's done teaching you how to dodge, parry, attack, and chug down holy bile, which, heck, that's nasty as hell. I think I preferred the copyright infringement. Grossness aside, once it introduces you to these, things begin to escalate rapidly. See, while Blasphemous may be a hack and slash, the creatures roaming the ruined landscape tend to be a genuine threat to the player. Not only are they fairly capable of dishing out some serious damage, especially in the early game, they have their own distinct attack patterns you'll need to learn if you're going to properly face them. If they don't just hit you off a ledge into a pit. Though, man, the devs did do an excellent job of making it intensely rewarding to a player if they do master combat, since if you manage to stagger an enemy, you get the option of brutally coup de graceing them with such a violent fury that I actually had to pause after the first few times they happened. Like, the normal death animations for the individual enemies are impressive to behold, but holy hell are the executions metal as fuck. And pretty beneficial to boot, since they refill your fervor bar quicker than just stabbing away at someone. And speaking of, managing your fervor is another important element of the game, since it's essentially your MP. Just sort of gradually fills up over time as you commit wanton acts of violence against the heretical masses. Or, I guess you can just slit your wrists like a complete edgelord to fill it up faster if you can spare the act of damaging yourself. Yes, that's a legitimate act. Anyways, you get enough fervor and you'll be able to execute a prayer, which allows you to do things like call down a holy satellite beam, get a buff that makes you attack faster, and my personal favorite just being the ability to temporarily drain health on hit. Still, while the combat is an important element of the game, Blasphemous does have a lot to provide on the platformer side of things. And no, not just being knocked in pits by enemies, the haha, fuck you enemies, No, these things are providing a fair amount of interesting biomes for players to explore, the likes of which also happen to be riddled with lethal hazards, which, you know, in a truly non-linear Metroidvania fashion, you may turn out to be horribly equipped to navigate at first. Or I guess always, if you're like me and just happen to be effectively magnetized towards spikes and bottomless pits. Yeah, this is just a thing that happens to me a lot, guys. That said, honestly, my only major gripe here is that while you do slowly acquire a number of relics that essentially serve as the traditional Metroidvania mobility upgrades that allow you to further explore the world at large, minus a double jump, they made the decision to allow you to only equip 3 at a time, which frequently led to a lot of clicking in and out of menus, sometimes from room to room, sometimes even in the same room, just to ensure that you have the proper loadout of passive abilities to solve a specific platforming puzzle. Or a falling puzzle in a certain relic's case, and man did I suffer a few stupid deaths from forgetting to have that equipped at times too. Thankfully, the game's pretty generous with the shrines that serve as checkpoints, as well as the bile bottles you both start with and can acquire. I say thankfully because I persistently found myself being crippled or killed by traps. Which is also how I became familiar with its particular take on the death penalty. In this case, you don't lose all of your Tears Atonement, this game's currency/experience. No, instead you lose a chunk of your maximum fervor bar alongside a penalty towards any Tears of Atonement you gain. Considering that this lasts until you retrieve your floating ghost at the spot you died, and that it's cumulative, there's not really a whole lot stopping you from populating a specifically tricky spot with ghostly afterimages of yourself, because gravity is being an especially harsh mistress today. These might seem like very specific examples. I couldn't tell you why. That said, the devs aren't complete sadists, given they do afford players the option of being able to pay tiers to retrieve all your little guilty ghosties in one go. There's even an unblockable fast travel system you can use as you find the way stations, enabling a much lazier approach to navigating the land of Cvstodia. Am I even saying that right? Even still, I always felt motivated to explore, given that the crux of my strength as a character was solely derived from things I acquired rather than any sort of leveling system I could abuse. Wanted more health or fervor? Well, I needed to scour the map to find those locations. Prayers? Sure, get one early on with relatively little hassle, but the majority of them are either squirreled away in hidden chests or acquired as the result of completing a quest. And yes, you can buy some vessels for your holy bile, but you're also going to be finding a bunch of them. Oh, and if you're aiming to do more than just tickle the enemies you face, you'll need to seek out the Mea Culpa shrines, which not only provide you a permanent bonus to your attack damage, but also grant you the ability to start buying attack skills so you can stop swinging like a basic bitch. All the same, I think my favorite aspect of character advancement was the rosary beads in Mea Culpa hearts. Now in the beads case, you can actually buy a bunch of these, but they're mostly found from traveling around and exploring, and they do start out pretty limited, mostly because you can only equip 3 of them at once. But you can find more slots as you progress, given that each bead is effectively a passive ability of varying strength, such as granting an overall boost to defense, granting an even bigger boost to defense, or something more specialized like increased elemental defenses or somehow siphoning help from the act of petty vandalism or killing foes. There's a distinct array of options. There's also some pretty complementary synergies that can be done with the equipable Mea Culpa hearts, which grant far more powerful passive buffs alongside a debuff. For example, one of them gives you extra Tears of Atonement, but you can kiss all your bile flasks goodbye. That said, unlike beads, which you can just sort of change around on the fly, the hearts can only be swapped out at checkpoints, requiring a bit more commitment in your overarching strategy. Still, armed with all these advantages, it did make the boss fights a heck of a lot more approachable, given that those encounters are pretty goddamn brutal. While they never felt unfair, given that the attacks are well telegraphed and there's a definite logic to them, messing up during the fights can feel incredibly punishing since they are quite challenging. and thus all the more satisfying when you do finally put them down. Where to start here? Well, there's so much that's engrossing about Blasphemous' sound design, but what initially hooked me was the game's soundtrack, which managed to beautifully complement the uncanny sights you spelunk through. I'm also taking the moment to note I have nothing but praise for the voice acting, as I genuinely enjoyed the gravitas the actors brought to the table. I was honestly not expecting things to be as dramatic as they were when the characters started talking. And can we spend a few moments to talk about all the effort put into crafting the game's aesthetic? We can, because I'm in charge of this review! So, the various environments that you actually get to explore as the Penitent One are impressive to behold, as the lands are arranged in such a way that they very much feel organic. And there were certainly set pieces within these diverse locales that were fairly striking, especially as you acquire more abilities allowing you to navigate every nook and cranny. That said, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about just how absolutely amazing the character designs are. There's a truly grotesque array of both common enemies and bosses to confront over the course of the game, and the effort placed in both their combat animations as well as their gruesome demises is absolutely excellent. Which brings us to the finale, and just heck, do I enjoy this game? Having dived into it at launch, I have to say my run-through was an incredibly engrossing misadventure, and I've thoroughly enjoyed discovering as much as I have. The world it builds narratively is a truly peculiar and twisted beast, and yet it's an altogether compelling narrative, which made the process of discovering and completing the quests in Blasphemous a lot of fun. Heck, even the process of failing one of the quests simply served to add more mystery to the game. And I was absolutely enthralled by the gameplay, enough so that I found myself crossing my fingers that the second run in the game was serving as a sequel hook. And it had me further looking forward to some of the Kickstarter promises being fulfilled, like the addition of the New Game Plus, which yes, I am totally holding my breath for that. That said, I am also eager for the implementation of other elements that were part of the as-of unimplemented Kickstarter promises for Blasphemous. The quality of those additions match the level of what's already present. I'm going to be immensely content, because in my book, Blasphemous is a critical hit, being an absolutely solid game both narratively and mechanically. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or our Monday TTRPG content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know when there's a new release. There's also a Discord. You can click the link in the banner or the description so you can become a part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for both our lovely editor Jack, and to make sure we continue to provide quality content and not starve to death in the meantime. Again, you can check the description and the banner for them links. Anywho, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.